this is something that I think the left should spend more time discussing a little bit. And it's not just about Gloria Steinem. It's about the second wave of feminism and how that impacted the civil rights movement and what effect that had on Black women. You see, a lot of times people like to praise Gloria Steinem, and I wish people would stop doing that. When we talk about that second wave of feminism, what we have to understand is that, in my opinion, based on the evidence that I've seen, Gloria Steinem's second wave of feminism actually hurt the civil rights movement. I would also say that it was harmful towards Black women as well. We'll get into all of that. And I'm also going to dive into how I think this impacted the family unit, in particular for Black women. So Gloria Steinem was on the Griot. Even on the Griot, they interviewed Gloria Steinem, and she was talking a little bit about feminism. I want you to hear this.
An event. The question I had for you, I was reading your book. You said that in the March on Washington, you met a Black woman named Mrs. Green, and she brought up...
With an E, Mrs. Green with an E.
Green with an E.
Right.
She brought up the fact that Black women were, in many ways, the reason why the march happened, but so many weren't given the opportunity to speak. Why was that such a profound moment for you? What did you learn in that moment about Black women?
Well, she was seeing with eyes that I did not yet have. I mean, I was there just as, I didn't have any job or thing to do there. I was just one of thousands of people. This was the Martin Luther King March, and I was looking at the same platform she was. And she was seeing that there were no women speaking, and she was angry.
And you have friends like Maxine Waters, Dorothy Pittman Hughes, Flo Kennedy. What have Black feminists taught you?
Feminism. I mean, even before that, I remember I was working with the National Welfare Rights Organization, and they did the first feminist analysis of social policy I'd ever seen. They looked at welfare policy and did a wonderfully funny treatment of it as a gigantic husband that was jealous and looked under your bed for the shoes of other men and kept you on, hardly any money. I mean, it was very funny and very sharp. So, after that, I began to think about doing, taking a feminist look at all social policy. And Fannie Lou Hamer, for instance. I helped to interview Fannie Lou Hamer for the ACLU when Ruth Ginsburg there had a project against the forced sterilization of mostly women of color, of course, and especially Black women. And because that had happened to Fannie Lou, her interview was very important to the case. Fannie Lou was, we know, of course, that she was the great civil rights leader. But what we don't know, that she was also a great feminist who was a leader and a pioneer on reproductive freedom, which means the freedom to have or not to have children, to make that.
Let's pause right there at reproductive freedom. This is where we need to dive in. Let me let her finish. Hold on.
Decision. She had been sterilized in a Mississippi hospital when she went in for a completely different procedure without her knowledge. And she was very conscious of the fact that this happened to her at the same time that white women had to have, I think, 4 children and their husbands' written permission to have a sterilization of their own free will, And also she was a founder of the National Women's Political Caucus. Now, in the history books,
We'll stop there, because there's a couple of things I want to get into about Gloria Steinem. Obviously about the CIA part, I'll get to that in just a second. But I want to touch on something else that she said here. Apparently, no movement is perfect. And that includes the civil rights movement. And in the civil rights movement, according to Gloria Steinem, apparently there were disagreement among, some of the women and the men, because some of the women weren't happy that none of the women were allowed to speak on the stage at the march in Washington. So Gloria Steinem tells you here that she learned feminism from Black women. But as you go on, you notice and you see, even in my history books when I was in school, even though she learned that from Black women, Gloria Steinem became the face of the second wave of feminism. And her type of feminism did not benefit Black women, and it harmed the civil rights movement. I really want to have like women like understand this, especially if you're white women and you're listening. When you don't center other people, let me bring this up here. We'll bring up the CIA part first. When you don't center other people, which this was intentional, by the way, oftentimes what happens is that our views are pushed to the bottom of the list, or they're not touched at all. So let's get into a little bit about her role as a spy, right? Some people know about this, some people don't. Gloria Steinem's new book, My Life on the Road, recounts her life's journeys and travels. Early reviews and profiles reveal incredible detail of Steinem's barrier-breaking feminist role, liberal politics, romances, proclivities, and lifestyle. What is often missed or mischaracterized, however, is the work she did as a CIA agent. Steinem was a spook. CIA agents are tight-lipped, but Steinem spoke openly about her relationship to the agency in the 1950s and 60s after a magazine revealed her employment by a CIA front organization, the Independent Research Service. So, of course, it's not uncommon for the CIA to have these organizations that go under another name, right? And she doesn't, at the time, she didn't deny that. But she was a spy. I'm going a little bit more here and say, while popularity pillared because of her paymaster, Steinem defended the CIA relationship, saying, in my experience, the agency was completely different from its image. It was liberal, nonviolent, and honorable. So, let's get to the civil rights movement, shall we? The CIA spied on Dr. King. The CIA spied on Dr. Martin Luther King. And it says it right here. It says here, let me make it a little bit bigger. U.S. World News in brief. CIA spied on Dr. King. The CIA spied on Dr. King in the 1960s through informants, gathered records of King's telephone calls, and photocopied some of his credit card receipts and messages scrawled on business cards. According to documents in federal lawsuit, the documents disclosed and obtained by the Los Angeles Times contain discussions of how allegedly derogatory information about King could be used to discredit him as a civil rights leader. One CIA informant suggested that King be removed as a Black leader. So, you have Gloria Steinem, who was a spy for the CIA, and the CIA was spying on Dr. King. You have women that were a part of the civil rights movement, Black women that were dissatisfied that Black women weren't allowed to speak on the stage at the March on Washington. And some of those women also participated in Gloria Steinem's second wave of feminism. Why was this an issue? My theory is that Gloria Steinem's second wave of feminism was a distraction from the civil rights movement. This is not to say that I'm against women's rights, that I'm against women having equality. No, that is not true. But at the same time, when you have a movement, it is very important that you're not splitting resources and you're not splitting the people. Now, all of a sudden, the Black women, some of the Black women that were part of the civil rights movement, now they're splitting their time between movements. Because you see, somewhere along the way, Gloria Steinem's feminism had convinced them, you know, you also have to fight for your rights as a woman, not just for the Black community. But Gloria Steinem's feminism was different than what Black women were trying to do. When Black women were fighting for feminism, they were fighting for their entire community. Gloria Steinem's feminism was fighting for the right for mainly affluent white women to work alongside white male counterparts, right? To burn your bras. And then, of course, the reproductive rights. The problem that you run into is that you pick one or the other, because what happens is now you have a Black woman who's participating in the civil rights movement, also participating in the feminist movement. So she's fighting for her rights as a woman under a movement that really was not centering Black women's issues. It was centering the issues that affluent white women wanted to talk about. So while some of those white women were advocating for the right to work in these environments alongside other white male counterparts, a lot of Black women were already working. So it's like you're fighting for the right to be alongside white men in these environments, and you don't even have to work, but we have to work. We'll get into the class issue about this in just a second. But this part right here, feminist icon Gloria Steinem was an anti-communist CIA operative who kept the feminist movement from discussing class, only gender. And then I'll get to the racial part as well. Because see, this is a problem. And this is Gloria. This is who a lot of people love to praise. And she was so great, yada, yada. But when it comes to the class issue, listen to this part. We already talked about the CIA thing. You guys know about that. But I want to get to this. Socialism, not on Gloria's watch. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Gloria's aversion to socialism. She saw it as the ultimate buzzkill for feminism. Why bother discussing economic equality when you can focus on breaking glass ceilings and burning bras? Forget about the working class struggle. Gloria had more pressing matters, like ensuring that women could have it all. Who needs universal health care when you've got a killer highlighter game? And this is a missing part, a big, big missing part, because the Black women that decided to fight alongside Gloria Steinem were not in the same class for the most part as Gloria Steinem. So if you're fighting for reproductive rights, how are you not fighting for giving everybody health care as well? Because people like Gloria probably already had it. The Black women that are fighting with you needed things like health care. It wasn't just about the right to, decide whether or not you wanted to have a child. That costs money. You still need health care. So why was there no class struggle that was a part of this movement? And that is because it was never supposed to get to that level. If you look at the civil rights movement, even Dr. King towards the end started to organize the workers in Alabama. He started talking about the class issue as well. Even Dr. King said, we're going to talk about reparations when we go to DC, we're coming to get our check. Even Dr. King started talking about the class issue. And then after that, they killed Dr. King. So if you have women that are a part of your movement that were also part of the civil rights movement, which was also starting to talk about the class struggle, how could you not talk about class along with feminism? Because once you start to bring in the economic perspective, a lot of the affluent white women that were a part of the second wave of feminism, it doesn't apply to them because they're in a different class. She wasn't really trying to help women get to where they needed to get to. This is what people have to grasp from this. At the end of the day, the women, the Black women who were alongside Gloria Steinem, they still had to go back to neighborhoods. They still had to deal with Jim Crow laws. They still had to deal with redlining. They still had to deal with, you talk about healthcare, you talk about reproductive rights. They still had to deal with the fact that Black women have the highest rate of maternal death in the US still today. That's been an ongoing issue. They still had to deal with that. And Gloria Steinem's feminism did not center those issues because she was not affected. In order to have an effective movement for people who are marginalized, you have to center the marginalized positions. You have to center those issues. That wave of feminism did not do that. And of course, also Susan B. Anthony's first wave of feminism also didn't do that. It excluded Black women. Let's go on a little bit more here. He goes on to say the gender versus class debacle. So this is where we get into this part. Gloria wanted feminism to be all about gender, not class, because nothing screams empowerment like ignoring the systemic economic disparities that disproportionately affect women of color, right? Let's raise our champagne flutes to the audacity of it all. Who cares if the working class women can't afford healthcare or decent childcare or decent healthcare? As long as we're smashing patriarchy, the rest is just background noise. Lucy moves the football. So let's get to that part. Or did I get to that part yet? Because they do mention one of the things that she did right was founding Miss Magazine. But I was trying to get to the football part. Maybe I passed it already. Oh, I haven't gotten to that one yet. Okay, that gets to this one. Okay. While feminism failed to deliver progress for Black women, and this is another part, right? So when you look at feminism, and especially that second wave, many people assume the women's movement uplifts all women because, after all, birds of a feather flock together. However, looks can be deceiving. The women's movement historically prioritized the needs of white, affluent women, denigrating Black women. Feminism failed to address the unique intersection of sexism and racism Black women experience. The agenda prioritized strengthening women's liberties as opposed to universal civil rights for Americans. This is another thing. Black women cannot separate their womanhood from their race. Society pulls Black women in two different directions, each with a unique magnetic force. They fought alongside white feminists throughout history to improve women's lives alongside Black men to make advances in the Black community. Black women lack the resources to land a full-throated fight against sexism while ignoring the role of systemic racism. White women have the privilege of never needing to consider their race when fighting for their rights. Likewise, Black men never have to fear their sex holding them back socioeconomically. This is what people have to get. So there were also times when white feminists supported white racism, and the Black women were left standing by on their own. This is why when you see that women's march, the women's march after Trump won in 2016, look around, you notice you didn't see that many Black people out there. You don't see that many Black women. This is why we don't raise our hand to sign up and volunteer for those types of things, because of the way that feminism has done Black women in the past. We are not centered in the movement. Our issues are not centered in the movement. And Gloria Steinem is no different. This woman's face was all throughout my history books as the woman of feminism, Gloria Steinem this and Gloria Steinem that. And the issues that she was fighting for, were they really beneficial for Black women? I don't think so. It goes on to say here, we'll get into Lucy holding the football, because I think this is the part. Here it is. Lucy holding the football. White women are like Lucy from the iconic Peanuts comic strip. Fans will remember she repeatedly held the football, encouraging him to run towards her and kick it. Each time Charlie Brown ran, building up speed, only to be disappointed because Lucy yanked the ball away at the last minute. Black women are the Charlie Brown of the women's movement because white feminists often offer an olive branch, but instead give toxic oleander. Instead of deliverables, Black women receive stagnation and neglect. So there's Lucy moving the football. And here's an example here. While both Black and white women sought advancement, they did so for different reasons. Their methods of expanding rights reflect this disparity. In the aftermath of the Civil War, many white suffragists attempted to gain rights equal with their fathers, husbands, and brothers. However, Black women fought to secure rights to improve their lives in their communities. This part is also incredibly important. And then in this article, they go into the suffragettes and this part right here about the failure. The feminist movement failed to account for the different ways in which Black and white women view patriarchy. Under white-dominated male governance, Black and white women suffered many indignities. However, discriminatory practices prevented Black men from gaining power. Thus, comparing white patriarchy to Black patriarchy is like comparing apples to oranges. While it is true that Black men benefit from the male-dominated system, their benefit is significantly less than white men and works in different ways. So this is what I'm going to say about this. The example that I want to bring to you is that fight that Gloria Steinem had, we're going to fight for the right to work in the workplace alongside our white male counterparts. We're going to fight for the rights to burn our bras. We're going to fight for the rights and all those kind of things. That style of feminism was always trying to align itself with white patriarchy. It was always trying to align itself to be in the same position as white men. Black women were trying to fight for the entire community. So while Gloria Steinem is out there saying, let's go fight for the right to work with these guys and Black women were already working. In other words, that wasn't for us. That style of feminism was not for us. Alice Walker even criticizes this. She came up with her own term. She decided to call it womanism. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to say this was not for us. And then I got to talk about the family dynamic. Believe what you want to believe, but we got to go down this angle. Because you see, well, during that wave of feminism, like telling women, we got to fight for our reproductive rights, which I agree. Yes, that's a healthcare issue. But a lot of those women that were white feminists, they still went on to either they already had husbands or they went on to have a husband. Even Gloria Steinem got married eventually, had families. This was not a good message for Black women. How did this affect Black women down the line? We can point to someone like Terry McMillan. Terry McMillan, who wrote Waiting to Exhale, How Stella Got a Groove Back. Terry McMillan, at that point in time, her books were kind of known for telling Black women, you can do it on your own. You can be successful, educated. You don't need a man. Was that the right thing to say? Was that the right angle to go down to tell Black women they don't need a man? And then some women, they look around and they're in their 40s and they say, man, I changed my mind about this. I really do wish I would settle down with someone or whatever. Maybe I do want to. And then it's kind of too late because then some guys ain't really trying to date you when you're a certain age and all that kind of jazz, etc. And I think it's one thing to say that you don't need a man. But the question that I want you to ask, what did this do to the family dynamic for Black women? While the white women were standing there, the feminist movement telling you that we need to fight alongside to work next to the white men, remember, they never walked away from the family dynamic. And I just don't know if that was great for our community. And maybe some people say, may not agree, but I don't know if that was a great idea because I have to say this. When I watched Waiting to Exhale back in the day, and at the end of the movie, I see all the women ended up alone. I'm like, okay, they dated guys weren't good for them. They ended up alone. And then one of the women who was pregnant also ended up alone. I felt like the message that Terry McMillan was trying to send is that as a woman, you can do it all on your own. Okay, great. But why aren't we sending a message to keep the father in the home? And I don't want people to even think this is not even a right-wing talking point, but I'm just going to be real with you right now. There is nothing like having the dad in the home. I grew up in a 2-parent household. Some of my cousins did not. And even they will tell you the difference. So sometimes I wonder if that type of feminism was actually good for Black women. And I don't think it was. And when I look at the impact it had on the civil rights movement, I'm very concerned by that. And I'm very concerned by that because you have two movements now happening at the same time. And when that all started, now Gloria Steinem was able to make the case that white women were also marginalized. And now that white women were also marginalized, now they can be a part of affirmative action. Does everybody see how this works? So now you have added other people to our struggle. And since you added other people to our struggle, what that means is that our needs, once again, are going to be pushed to the bottom of the list. I just told you that the DEI, so-called DEI hires that happened at my previous employer were white women, not Black people. Gloria Steinem's second wave of feminism was able to prove that white women were also marginalized. Then we have this term minorities. So now it's not just about Black people fighting for civil rights. Now it's, oh, we got to help white women too. So there have been many times when I say, yes, she was a CIA op. She worked for the CIA. I felt like Gloria Steinem was thrown in to take the attention off of the civil rights movement, to derail it from us getting what we really should have gotten, which was reparations to begin with in the first damn place. I feel like that's what that really was about. Now, you'll see it here. It says from feminism to family values, how white women left Black women behind. And there are a number of examples of this. Just one I want to get to here. One part here. This part. It says the retreat of white women from feminist solidarity has left Black women grappling with compounding challenges. Systemic issues such as mass incarceration, economic disenfranchisement, and healthcare disparities have devastated Black communities, contributing to low marriage rates and fractured family structures. What did I just tell you guys? Low marriage rates and fractured family structures. Now add feminism, or Gloria Steinem's feminism, to that. So Black women are the least likely to get married. Do you guys know this? In the United States, Black women are the least likely to get married. And not saying everybody has to get married, but there's something to say about that. The rent, not race. Look at this. The crux of white women's retreat from liberal feminism lies not in a rejection of racial equality, but in an urgent response to economic instability. While Black women often preach independence and embrace the mantra of I don't need a man, remember I was telling you that? Influenced by feminist narratives, white women were focused on ensuring their sons would someday become heads of household with wives and families to support. For many white women, the stability of their children's futures, particularly their sons, has been a central concern. They view financial security as essential to fulfilling these traditional roles, reflecting the societal structures they grew up with and still value. When you look at the way that people voted, people moved as a unit. Obama stood up there and he pointed his fingers at black men and said, problem is you brothers. But the numbers showed very clearly that white women were moving along with their partner when it came to voting, that white women and white men heavily showed up to support Donald Trump. They were continuing to move as a unit. So here, one more part I want to add as well. It says the independent black women thought they were building alongside white women in solidarity against patriarchal structures. But in reality, it's a divergence in both experiences and objectives. As black women celebrated self-reliance, they were unaware that many white women were simultaneously reinforcing traditional gender roles with their own families, particularly their sons. This misalignment has left black women grappling with systemic inequities and fractured alliances, navigating a reality starkly different from the solidarity they once believed they shared. So Alice Walker changed it. Alice Walker saw that there were issues with this type of feminism. And so what Alice Walker said is that womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender, Alice Walker. It says here that she changed it. She came a different word. Alice Walker, Black feminist poet, author, and activist, coined the term womanist in her book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose. Womanism or Black feminism offers a space for Black feminists who have been erased from our own labor for the mainstream feminist movement, which often centers white cis women who are seeking to be equal to white cis men. So Alice Walker decided to come up with a whole different word and said, we are going to go with womanism. And this is the message that I've been trying to get across to people when we have movements. When you don't, and you can say this with the progressive movement too. I still thought that Bernie Sanders should have had a reparations plan. When you are not willing to center the issues of those who are the most marginalized that are a part of your movement does not serve those people. And in some ways, it can hurt those people. And that is what happened with Gloria Steinem's feminism movement. Oh, thank you, Money Making Bear. I'm so glad you brought this up. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So what we have to understand is that at the end of the day, for the most part, even with that feminist movement, white women were not willing to break up the family dynamic. They were not willing to break up the family unit. Yet you got people out here telling Black women you can do it all by yourself and you don't need to have a man. So I think we need to seriously think about how we form movements, how we structure movements, particularly within this country. Maybe I need to do a separate episode about Terry McMillan, because I've read a lot of her books. Lana says young college women could be duped until they got out into society. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I just think, what's wrong, FM? Why did white women do this, Sabby? Well, I think, again, all in all, people are looking out for their interests, right? Like a lot of times the first thing that comes to your mind is what's going to help you, not what's going to help your neighbor, what's going to help your buddy. And then there are some nefarious reasons. Some may have done this to break up the family. You guys can come up with your own conclusions. But my message to everybody is this. I think that there is something incredibly strong about having the two-parent household. I know sometimes things don't work out. People get divorced, not trying to shame nobody. If you're a single parent, not trying to shame you. But I think the message that was kind of sent out, especially like, I feel like in the 90s, that like, oh, you could just go ahead, just take care of that baby by yourself or whatever. That was not a positive message. And I think back to even Terry McMillan, and I get what she was trying to do, to tell people that get your education, you can be smart. I get it. At the same time, I don't think that was the best message to send out into the community. So the Gloria Steinem thing, I think people really need to understand this, that this woman did not look out for our best interest. She did not. She looked out for the interest that benefited her. And she even told you, she even said, well, I got feminism from Black women, but why was she the face of it? She was the face of it because that's who they wanted to be the face of it. And I think you know who I mean when I say they. That's who they wanted to be the face of it. Just like I told you about Rosa Parks, right? Rosa Parks wasn't the first person not to give up her seat. She was selected because the other woman that it happened to, number one, they said that she was pregnant and she was a teenager. And number two, they said her complexion was too dark. They pick who they want these people to be. Gloria Steinem was chosen. Yes, Danny, they. Yes. And this is why a lot of times you'll see when a lot of these movement happens, this is why a lot of times Black people, not as many of us get involved. Because the moment we say, well, we got to deal with these issues, blah, blah, blah. No. Let's not focus on that. Let's just no. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.